value from success, growth in discovery. Golden Arrow Resources is a well-funded gold-copper exploration company with proven management and prospective properties in Chile, Argentina, and Paraguay. Golden Arrow trades on the Toronto Venture Exchange, symbol GRG, on Frankfurt, symbol G6A, and the OTCQB, symbol GARWF. For more information, visit us at goldenarrowresources.com or call Sean at 778-686-0135.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is award-winning investigative reporter Bob Mackin, the publisher of TheBreaker.News. Welcome back to the show, Bob.
Thank you.
Bob, the BC election, was it needed?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And we'll see on October 24th or afterwards, as the votes are being counted, whether voters will punish John Horgan for doing that, for breaking his word with the Green Party, the confidence of supply agreement that made him premier, the agreement that he delivered along with Andrew Weaver, then the leader of the Green Party, back in 2017 after the election, when the Green caucus decided to support the Liberal, let's start over again. When the Green caucus decided to support the NDP caucus to give them enough votes to defeat the Liberals in a confidence motion. And that happened at the end of June 2017. And John Horgan, of course, since mid-July 2017, has been premier. During his time, he promised, during the election period, as well as in that confidence and supply agreement with the Green Party, to amend BC's election laws to move the fixed date, making the election in October of 2021 versus May of 2021. BC has had fixed elections since 2001 in May of each year, every 4 years. In 2001, 2005, 2009, 2013, 2017, and 2021. It was supposed to be in May, but the NDP amended the law to make it October 2021. But John Horgan decided to pull a fast one and ask the Lieutenant Governor for an election in October 2020, a year ahead of time. And so that spelled the end of the agreement with the Greens, which was only supposed to be amended by mutual consent or by a vote in the legislature on confidence. And there was no negotiation to amend it. And there was no vote in the legislature on confidence of the NDP. John Horgan, utterly went to the Lieutenant Governor and asked, and as she normally does, gave the permission to call the election. So here we are on the way to October 24th, an election that really should not be happening at all. Not at all. And certainly voters of the Green stripe will be punishing John Horgan because Sonia Furstenau, their new leader, who became the leader a week before the election was called, certainly was happy with the way things were going, that the Greens and their confidence and supply agreement was going well according to the Greens, although former leader Andrew Weaver was endorsing John Horgan and said that most of the agreement had been fulfilled anyways, so why not have an election? But Sonia Furstenau, the existing leader, had talks with John Horgan, and he didn't agree with her and decided to go to the Lieutenant Governor on September 21st and call this election. This pandemic election that's happening during a state of emergency. It's almost surreal to be watching this, and meanwhile there have been more than 2,200 people who have been diagnosed with coronavirus since the day that John Horgan called the election, and averaging about one death per day during that election. This is John Horgan and the NDP who spent the rest of the year before September 21st telling us that the most important thing this year was the health of British Columbians, as well as the economic health of British Columbians. That we're in the pandemic, and that was job number one. But instead, they pushed pause and made their job number one, their bid for re-election, essentially their own employment security for the next 4 years. That's what became most important for the NDP. And again, Sonia Furstenau, the Green leader, and Andrew Wilkinson, the BC Liberal leader, have been reminding people all along the way that that's really what this is all about. It's not really about economic or political stability in British Columbia. It's about John Horgan and the NDP getting a majority, solidifying their employment for the next 4 years.
Really, I think the election should Dr. Bonnie Henry be premier. But, of course, the government's going to try to ride on her coattails, right?
Well, that's been essentially what's been happening. Bonnie Henry was essentially made the de facto face and voice of the British Columbia government. John Horgan, for much of this year, has been cloistered. Once the pandemic was declared in March, they decided to make Bonnie Henry the face and voice of the government, with co-star Adrian Dix, the health minister, doing daily updates, and sometimes the updates were going Mondays to Saturdays and just taking Sundays off. That was what was happening back in the spring. They reeled it back later in the spring and into the summer to 2 or 3 times a week. But if you look at how much FaceTime this year, if you were to analyze the amount of FaceTime and media attention this year given to British Columbia political officials, far and away, Bonnie Henry is number one, and John Horgan would be a distant second. That's just the way it's gone, and that was a calculated strategy by the BC NDP government. We've seen what's gone on in other provinces. Ontario, for instance, Doug Ford has always remained the face and voice of the Ontario government, even though he's brought in the experts there, the health minister there, as well as their chief medical officer. But it's always been Doug Ford putting forward the strategy or the appearance that the buck starts and stops at his desk, whereas in British Columbia, essentially the reins were given to Bonnie Henry to be the face and voice of the government on this important health issue. And love to be a fly in the wall in any discussions that took place. And John Horgan is quick to say that they've taken all the advice from Dr. Bonnie Henry, but I wonder if he ever went to her and said straight up, I mean, so far we've had no indications from either party, if he went straight up to her and said, Bonnie, if it was your call, would you allow us to have an election this year? Of course, it'd be interesting to hear the answer. The other part of the situation is that Dr. Bonnie Henry is not in an independent office of government. She has an office within the wider Ministry of Health. She reports to a deputy minister who reports ultimately to the minister. She's not like the ombudsperson or the auditor general, for instance, that doesn't exist outside government, doesn't have the ability essentially to tell government what to do. And that's essentially why we're in this election as well. I think that the whole process of how we got into this election is a little bit too secretive and in many ways anti-democratic because, again, this shouldn't be happening right now. I don't think any British Columbians were crying out for an election. I don't think there is even a throw the bums out sentiment, which is likely why the NDP is going to stay in power and perhaps get a majority come after May 24th when the votes are tallied. But I think we're going to look back at this strange period in British Columbia political history, and if it goes the other way, because strange things have happened before in British Columbia. The first NDP government back in 1972 ended in 1975 because Dave Barrett called a snap fall election. And look what happened there. We still have 10 days or so, one full weekend plus one full business week left to go before voting day. And with the advanced polling, with the mail-in voting, which is exponentially grown over previous years, you never know what could happen. You never know if there could be an October surprise along the way that might turn the tides against the NDP and that might give new wind into the sails of the BC Liberals. This is British Columbia. Strange things have happened. And if that were to happen, then of course John Horgan would wear this whole thing that if he loses power in an election he didn't have to call for a year, he would go down as one of the biggest losers in British Columbia history. But so far the political polls are pointing towards an NDP win, and it's looking like a political gamble that might actually pay off for the NDP.
Well, I recall when Adrian Dix had a 22-point lead in the polls and lost to Christy Clark.
Yeah, that was an interesting time. The BC Liberals, of course, were the governing party at the time, had a bigger war chest, had more skillful political operatives in the back rooms, and that was the campaign, of course, the NDP of opposition, and the NDP who were pit bulls in question period. It was like you flipped a switch, and then once they started the campaign, they had this Obama-style feel-good kind of campaign, and they didn't attack the BC Liberals on BC Liberal corruption until too late in the campaign. It was way too late. And by then, the BC Liberals in 2013 were able to define Adrian Dix as a leader and to throw enough attack ads at him. And then, of course, the polls before the last weekend of the campaign said one thing, that it was looking like an NDP win, but then it was that weekend the BC Liberals basically cleared out their budget through the kitchen sink at the NDP and at the voters to try to get their attention with that famous ad, the Adrian Dix weather vane ad, which spooked enough voters to think, well, how should they vote? And it was your typical 1 minute Liberals. People went to the voting station thinking that they vote NDP, but at the last minute they thought, you know what, maybe I'll vote BC Liberal instead. And that's what happened. That they eked out a surprise win in that campaign. And again, that really was Adrian Dix and the NDPs to lose. They really should have become government. The BC Liberals were suffering a lot of infighting. There were a lot of doubts about Christy Clark's leadership. There was even a movement afoot during that campaign to start the leadership contest as soon as the polls closed. They called it the 801 Club, this little group that was starting to get ready to rebuild the BC Liberals. They didn't have to at the time because, of course, the unthinkable happened, and Christy Clark led the BC Liberals to a surprise upset victory, and the NDP had to wait another 4 years before they could taste power again.
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after this.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications, patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, the BC election debate, there's only going to be one. We got to see Sonia Furstenau, the brand new leader of the BC Greens, perform. A lot of people said they thought she was more, I don't know, we can't use the word presidential, but how about premiership-like than either Andrew Wilkinson, the leader of the Liberals, or John Horgan, the NDP premier.
There is a second debate, a radio debate, but it will not be seen by as many people, and the production values, of course, won't be like they were for the TV debate. But the TV debate really is the one that matters most, and it was held at Chan Centre, UBC, socially distanced. There was nobody in the seats at the concert hall. There was Shachi Curl from Angus Reid Institute, the polling company, as the moderator, who did a pretty good job of keeping the leaders within timelines, within topic, and allowing for enough debate without it going off the rails like we've seen some other debates recently on TV. But Sonia Furstenau had essentially the most to gain and the least to lose. Here she is with a caucus 2. It used to be 3, but Andrew Weaver, of course, went independent and has decided not to run again. So the Greens are in a battle to try to keep those 2 seats, her seat, and also Adam Olsen, 2 Vancouver Island seats, Southern Vancouver Island seats, where the Greens are quite popular. They're also challenged to try to make some inroads elsewhere, whether it's other parts of southeastern BC or Metro Vancouver. This really is the Greens behind the 8 ball because of how the election was. They just came out of a leadership campaign, and they weren't able to field a full slate of 87 candidates. They got 74, but not 87. And it's unlikely that they'll form government at the end of the day, but Sonia Furstenau is pitching to voters that the voters support the Greens in order to have a similar situation like we have had before, that perhaps the Greens could have another chance to have the balance of power, because in British Columbia, again, it is a notoriously divided and polarized province, and as much as the NDP came into this campaign with this wide margin in the polls, it's all about how the vote falls. And the popular vote versus how many votes are tallied in each district, and it could get interesting afterwards while they tally the votes, and it could take several days to tally the votes, if not weeks, before we know a winner. But back to the debate, back to Sonia Furstenau, she was the most relaxed. She was there in center stage, a very good handle on all the issues, and she knew what she wanted to ask Andrew Wilkinson and ask John Horgan, and she knew that she was going to attack John Horgan's decision to call this election and to turn his back on what seemed to be working quite effectively, that deal that the NDP had with the Greens. So she was able to score a lot of points against John Horgan, keep her cool, keep a very, very cool demeanor. As the only woman in the debate, she was able to set the tone in many ways. You did have John Horgan, who at times appeared a little bit nervous. He actually got the election date wrong. He said at first it was October 26th, then quickly corrected himself to October 24th. That was notable, and Andrew Wilkinson made sure that he reminded people that he had a past as being a doctor and also being a lawyer. He wanted everyone to know that. He mentioned both of those multiple times. I found it interesting that Horgan didn't actually attack him on that, because Andrew Wilkinson's career trajectory included becoming a doctor, but then going from being a doctor to being a lawyer. And one of his clients, when he was a lawyer, was tobacco industry. He was representing tobacco industry clients who were trying to fend off lawsuits from governments that were trying to recover money from the very highly profitable tobacco industry in order to pay the health bills of the cancer patients that happened because of addiction to nicotine. And that's an easy, low-hanging fruit, but I was surprised that John Horgan didn't go down in that direction. He did use his podium to question Andrew Wilkinson about the handling of the Jane Thornthwaite scandal, Thornthwaite Gate. Jane Thornthwaite's comments about Beau and Ma that offended so many people on that virtual roast of Ralph Sultan, the retiring West Vancouver Capilano Liberal MLA, and she said some things that were a little bit inaccurate about Beau and Ma and Ralph Sultan. Beau and Ma, of course, the Lonsdale NDP member who herself is an engineer, and Ralph Sultan, who is an engineer himself. They both come from the same industry, and there was more of a mentor and protege relationship between the two. They didn't see eye to eye on political thinking, but they were quite appreciative of their loyalty to the professional engineer profession, and that's where it came from. And in fact, what Jane Thornthwaite said about Beau and Ma cuddling up with Ralph Sultan was rather inaccurate, because as I've noticed, and some of my sources have noticed, that Ralph is hard of hearing, and anyone and everyone who needs to talk to him needs to get close to him, and is not really cuddling. So John Horgan used that against Andrew Wilkinson. Andrew Wilkinson, of course, tried to justify that in saying that that was at a time during this roast, and it was difficult to stop the train, essentially, and questioned Jane Thornthwaite at the time, and said that they were all offended and wish they'd done something at the time. But now that they're saying that, of course, because that's out there in the public domain, and it doesn't make the Liberals look good, because that Zoom meeting shows essentially what's the old guard of the BC Liberals. It's not young, and it's not diverse. It's not the image that the BC Liberals under Wilkinson promised to show to voters in the last couple of years, when Wilkinson said he was going to regenerate the party. So it's caused a lot of consternation on the inside of the party. A lot of people not very happy with the way Wilkinson, as well as Jane Thornthwaite, handled it. So that became a bit of an issue. Also, the issues of race relations, that became an issue there, a bit of a talking point. But we didn't see much in the way of fireworks. It's interesting, Sonia Furstenau really was the the cerebral thinker in the whole equation, but we also didn't see the fireworks that we could have expected between the Liberals and the NDP, between Horgan and Wilkinson. We've seen a lot more animated discussion and question period in recent years, but we didn't really see that come out in the debate. That conflict, that moment of conflict, just isn't really there. That as the turning point, it was in this day and age when we do have overheated political discussions. It was a little bit refreshing in the aspect that you got a good solid 90 minutes of understanding of where the leaders came from and what the issues are that they represent, but we didn't get that moment that really divides them and puts the wedge between them, and that was, I think, a little bit disappointing. Except Sonia first now had the closest thing to a Gordon Wilson moment when she did, for a period of time, put John Horgan on notice that his decision to have this election at a time when there's more important things, and his decision to have this election at this time by turning his back on his own word, on agreements and law, that really was perhaps the moment that you can bottle and take away from this, that will certainly energize Sonia first now in order to get the Green votes out, but will it in the end harm the NDP? Certainly the NDP loyalists will always vote NDP, but how about the soft voters in the middle? Will people decide to stay away, or will people change their votes to Green or to BC Liberal as a reaction to an election which shouldn't be happening right now?
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after this.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlan, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, I've never seen an election where they've been so bold-facedly offering you back your own tax money. The NDP saying $500 directly deposited in your bank account, $1,000 for a family. The Liberals saying we'll eliminate the provincial sales tax for a year. They haven't said how much that would put back in your own pocket. Also, perhaps allow competition for car insurance, although they've promised that in the past and never followed through. And with the NDP promise with money into your bank account, what about the poor folks in British Columbia who aren't even allowed to have bank accounts because they have no fixed address? They live on the street. Aren't those the people who could use that cash the most?
Yeah, it's a strange situation where all the parties have basically thrown the budgets out the window and said, to hell with this. It's like funny money time. They I don't think have a handle on reality themselves or understand that someone's going to have to pay this bill sometime down the road. It can't just go on like this, and yeah, you can hope that the economy gets back on its feet and produces enough tax revenue to fill the coffers again. But to assume that right now, at a time when we're just at the start of the second wave of the virus, as we're getting into fall and it's going to be perhaps a difficult winter, it really is, again, silly season in so many different ways. The Liberals, I can see exactly why the Liberals are doing it, because the last election campaign, Christy Clark led them in 2017, the party realized that the platform they put out was too frugal, that they'd made too many cuts in the previous 4 years. They'd cut things that didn't need to be cut, like the free bus passes for disabled people and people on social assistance, converting from the free bus pass system to a system of small payments per month when these people didn't necessarily need an extra payment of $100 a month. They needed that bus pass, that dedicated bus pass. That meant a lot to them to get around, people that couldn't afford a car. things like that, just the small things that added up to something larger, and that was basically a distrust of the BC Liberals. The Liberals in 2017 didn't do enough to address housing affordability. People saw the neighborhoods, especially in urban areas, changing overnight with empty houses and construction sites, and finding out that there was an element of money laundering somewhere along the way. So the BC Liberals today, under Andrew Wilkinson, have realized that, and they decided to go for the big spectacular promise. And it's interesting how they let that out on a Sunday earlier in the campaign. It reminds me of what happened in 2017 when the NDP won up the BC Liberals also on a Sunday, when the BC Liberals said they were going to have a discount on bridge tolls. The NDP countered and said, well, we will have no bridge tolls. They promised to take them away, and that's what they did. Well, this is what the BC Liberals tried to do with the NDP, not only on the provincial sales tax, but when it comes to Surrey, the BC Liberals decided to also say that they would pause the transition from RCMP to municipal police in Surrey and have a referendum for people in Surrey to let them decide if they wanted to pay for this and if they want this to go forward. So that was an ambitious plan there. The BC Liberals this time around have been trying to go for those big, large, spectacular announcements that are emotionally charged. And one of those, of course, is ICBC, to allow competition into the market to take ICBC's monopoly status away. There's a lot of people out there who don't like ICBC for so many reasons, and don't trust the NDP with ICBC, and the NDP hasn't worked fast enough to change ICBC. So the BC Liberals' solution is just let the free market decide. Let ICBC continue to operate, but also let the free market decide. So we've seen the bigger promises there, and then on the NDP side, we've seen a party that's already pushed the deficit beyond 12 billion, almost 13 billion, and in their platform, it contemplates more than 15 billion for a deficit. I mean, this deficit is because after the budget, they voted on a $5 billion aid package. All parties agreed to this back in March, and then over the summer, the NDP found another $1 billion to make it $6 billion. And then there's the lost tax revenue, which is added to the deficit. And they're promising to spend an extra $3 billion, all kinds of goodies, building hospitals all over the place, building schools all over the place, hiring more nurses, and then, of course, the $1.4 billion plan to send $1,000 checks, direct deposits to families, and $500 to singles. It really is silly season in so many ways, trying to buy our votes with our own money, and I think that we're missing out on a discussion of, well, how is this going to be paid for? This can't be going on forever. We already know that the next generation, the children of British Columbia, are facing a large deficit, a large debt. Well, what about their children? Are we now leaving a bigger sea of red ink for grandchildren and great-grandchildren? When will this ever be back to normal in any way? That's not part of the discussion from any parties, especially the BC Liberals, who are spending more liberally, or at least promising more liberally, than they are looking at the balance sheet. And especially with the provincial sales tax holiday that they're proposing, that would take about $6.8 billion out of government bottom lines for a year, and then they bring it back at 3% for the next year. So that's a promise that's well more than $9 billion. Could consumer activity make up for it? Although in the game of political chess, they were able to do something which was a little bit nifty, because the NDP, especially their social media crew, attacked the BC Liberals on that promise, which was kind of awkward because sales taxes are actually regressive. That the people with lower incomes are often the ones that are hit the most because they can afford the less. And if you can take away that provincial sales tax, the people at the lower income will be able to stretch that dollar a little more and not be able to worry so much about their personal financial situation. But instead, the NDP tried to cast it as something that would allow people who are buying cars and yachts to have a discount, when in fact a tax like that, a provincial sales tax, you take it away, and it actually helps the people at the lower end of the income scale.
And of course, too, there's always the lefts always seem to promise extra taxes on the rich. The problem with taxing the rich is they can live anywhere and they can move in an instant. Your regular working stiff can't.
Yeah, that's right. And in this case here, you can read between the lines of the NDP platform, and that's what they're going to do. They're saying they're not going to cut any programs and no services. And funny enough, the BC Liberals say the same thing. But in the NDP platform, they say that they're going to keep services, keep employment. They're not going to have any austerity. But the only thing they promise is that there will be no increased taxes for the middle class, which essentially is Morse code for the rich. They're going to come after the rich eventually. And as you say, the rich can find ways to find lawyers to help them decrease their tax burden, and the rich know how to find ways to send their money elsewhere and move their money elsewhere. It really is a bit of a vicious circle. So that's if that's the only thing the NDP has after this election to try to increase government revenue, then that would be rather unfortunate, and that won't get them reelected the next time around. But the interesting part is, I asked John Horgan straight up, what new taxes, what new fees, what current fees that are existing, what current taxes that exist will be raised to pay for this. And his answer basically was a bit of a cop-out, saying that they have no plans now. There are no plans now, which is probably the oldest in the book. That we know that two things are certain, which are death and taxes, and they will have to raise them. And I think it's disingenuous for a politician to go in an election campaign and promise to spend all this money and not give the people who actually earn the money and who fund government. It's disingenuous, and people might use other words as well for a politician to not be open and transparent about how it's going to be paid for. Again, that brings us back to what we're likely to see when the votes are tallied. This will be far below a 100% turnout. We just don't have 100% turnouts in our elections in Canada. Municipal elections are among the lowest, but provincial campaigns can sometimes have a bit of an uptick, same as federal, if there's one big issue, or a throw the bums out sentiment among the populace. That isn't really here right now. No one is really complaining about the performance of John Horgan. It's been a rather middle-of-the-road government in so many ways. Some people have been unhappy in the business community about some taxation issues, but it's not been an issue really at all. And the economy was going along just fine until we got into 2020. But I think that the issue of taxation is going to be something that will be front and center going forward. The BC Liberal platform actually proposes a fair tax commission to review every tax the government has, and that's been part of their message as well, to pinpoint all the taxes that have been raised during the NDP 3.5 years in office, which isn't entirely accurate, because they say there's been 23 taxes increased or introduced under the NDP, and some of those taxes would have been increased or introduced by the BC Liberals if they're in power. I mean, for instance, the marijuana industry and taxes on marijuana, well, the BC Liberals would have slapped a tax on that as well. Of course, there's still the to and fro about the real estate taxes, which in many neighborhoods have actually changed the behavior of landlords, and we're seeing more houses being rented out. And no tax is perfect, and of course government likes to use taxes often as a punitive measure, not just as a measure to raise revenue, but I think that's going to be a big issue going forward. We've seen government unleash the purse strings in order to try to keep society together during this pandemic after shutting businesses down, shutting industries down, and look where tourism is right now. I think that's going to be the big issue of 2020, not 2022, when the health emergency starts to subside. We're going to have to look at the bottom line, the economic emergency, and find out how we're going to dig us out of this hole.
And again, when there's promises about taxes, I remember Colin Hanson, who was the finance minister from 2009 to 2011. I was at his writing office when he said the HST is not on our radar. 3 months later, there it was. And I said, you need better radar sets. and of course, after they were voted out, he became a park ranger. So much for being a finance minister, making that. Again, it wasn't on the radar. But whenever somebody says to me, am I right when they say we will study that issue? That's pretty well a no to whatever you asked.
Oh yeah, Colin Hanson also ended up being involved in the Advantage BC, which is part of this weird tax credit scheme, which drew some rather specious companies from China to set up shop in Vancouver, and it got the attention of the New York Times back in 2017. That didn't look good on him. After that, definitely the only other thing that could be within the realm is that the NDP gets back into power, or the BC Liberals get into power, and after, just like that HST experiment, after they get back into power, or after they get into power, they look at the books and say, ooh, it's worse than we ever thought it was. And those promises we made during the election, bear with us, please be patient. We may not be able to fulfill them all like we wanted to on schedule, so we may have to wait. We promised to do this, but we're not going to be able to do it to that level, so just bear with us. So any promises that are made now during an election, if you're a voter and you're looking at the platforms and you're hearing all the pronouncements of the politicians, stand back and say they may not be able to fulfill these. And you've got to make your choice on your mail-in ballot or at the voting station based on so many factors. And just because they smile nicely on TV or appear friendly on TV, that's just the persona they want to put forward to the public to get your vote. Think wisely, think more about the future of the province and also what's gone in the past 3.5 years into the NDP. They're running a campaign which is using typical techniques. They're complaining about, and rightly prosecuting the case of the BC Liberals from early 2000s, laying off so many healthcare workers, and how that resonates today because there weren't enough healthcare workers to work at long-term care homes, and look what happened to the coronavirus at long-term care homes. It's all fine and dandy for the NDP to do that, but when you ask Adrian Dix and John Horgan about why BC wasn't better prepared for the pandemic, well, they only want to talk about 2020 and what they've done this year and how many billions of dollars they spent and also the promises going forward. They don't want to talk about 2019 or 2018 or the half of 2017 that they were in power. Evidence that I've been able to uncover in the Breaker.News shows how poorly prepared they were, how they let the pandemic emergency medical supply stockpiles held regionally around the province dwindle to the point that in one of the health authorities they had nothing. They had $0 value of personal protective equipment and other medical supplies which were set aside in case of a pandemic. This program was started after the SARS pandemic back in the mid-2000s, which didn't hit Canada as hard as this. But that was when health authorities and health ministers and others in the health industry decided to stand back and say, what can we do to prepare for the next pandemic? Because it could be a bigger one. Well, look what happened. It's a bigger one. We're suffering because of it, our economy, our healthcare system. And there's evidence that I found through Freedom of Information that the BC government was not prepared and that the NDP didn't do enough coming into 2020. But the NDP doesn't want to talk about that. They only want to talk about what they spent this year, and they only want to talk about what they're promising to spend next year and beyond. So be careful when you do go out and vote. Think very carefully of who you want representing yourself on the local level, and also think about this whole exercise as it is. Do you really trust John Horgan and the NDP after getting us into this election at a time when, in a year when they said job number one was the health of the province, but instead they've taken us into this direction, into an election where they've decided to make their job security the most important thing in the fall of 2020, rather than continuing on with what they said during the spring and the summer of 2020, that the health of the province and the future of the province was most important, not political power, not having a political campaign.
Bob, BC, as you said, politics here very polarized. Usually people here very vocal, very passionate about politics. This is the most silent provincial election I've ever heard. I'm not talking about election ads, or nobody's talking about it. Does ignoring what's going on a thing that could affect the results?
I think that, again, that could bear out in the turnout. But the turnout for this, either by mail-in ballot or in person at the voting stations, could be much less, because, again, there isn't that one issue that is driving people to the polls. People weren't prepared for this. People were prepared for it next year. So there wasn't this lead up to it, and there isn't this community rallying around any political causes, any major causes. And essentially, this has been a year where people have been overwhelmed and exhausted. I think those are two words that when we look back at 2020, when we have year-end retrospectives in December, the words overwhelmed and exhausted are going to be registering near the top of the charts. And I don't think people were ready for this or wanting it. People are getting involved in many ways because they feel it's a civic duty. You've always got to vote when you get the chance. Many people believe, for good reasons, because Canadians fought for it, fought to keep democracy happening. So I think you're right there. I think that we're going to see perhaps a disappointing turnout because people aren't paying attention, and they're also, this is also by design by the NDP. The NDP is party in power, and as we've seen through our system, the party in power can control essentially when an election happens. And John Horgan says he woke up in the first Saturday actually, no, I think it was the last Saturday of summer, and woke up and said, let's have an election. They actually were planning this months and months ago. The NDP actually had, in June, online seminars for its supporters to plan for an election, to plan for a socially distanced election, to essentially get together and discuss strategies on how they could fight an election. And they started to put out job ads to hire staff on the riding by riding level in summer as well. So they had been planning this in an intense fashion since June of this year. But they've been able to do this by design. And by design, I mean, we're not getting the traditional election that we know and love, which is an election that includes all candidates meetings, where the community can get together in groups, big and small, to hear the candidates in each of the ridings and to ask them questions face to face, and to hear the candidates also debate amongst themselves the questions of the day. We are using more technology, of course. We've got Zoom and Facebook Live and YouTube and other social media channels, but that's no substitute at all for the good old-fashioned town hall meeting. And we are not having those town hall meetings because, again, the NDP is exploiting the fact that we've got provincial health orders that say we cannot gather in groups of more than 50 people. And no one has really been able to find a way to use technology to fully replicate a town hall meeting. As much as you can put a camera in front of people, that's the other challenge, is that candidates aren't really wanting to get into the same room with each other. So there's very little chance for that discourse and that challenge, that question and answer, that natural discussion of ideas and issues. We're really missing that, and I think that's going to harm this election as well. This could be a turning point for democracy in British Columbia. That if the NDP wins this and is satisfied with its margin of victory, they'll look at this and say, "Wow, well, let's try this again next time." And next time, hoping there won't be a state of emergency next time, and hoping that this pandemic will be long over next time. But you might see a political party look at this as an example of what they can do when they can use technology to their advantage, when they can take advantage of a weakened news media. There's fewer media outlets. There are fewer media outlets here in British Columbia today than there were on January 1st. Thinking of the Vancouver Courier being shut down, for instance, Vital Voice for well over a century. That's just one of many outlets that have either closed down or had to lay off staff. So there's fewer reporters working in communities in British Columbia, fewer reporters who are able to ask the questions that matter of the public officials and those people who want to be public officials. And because of the pandemic, there's fewer opportunities for British Columbians to get together face to face to actually, share ideas and ask the questions and demand the answers. And I know we're in an era when we can't, we're being discouraged from shaking hands or standing close to each other, but it's unfortunate that there could not have been a way found. But then again, I don't think the NDP wanted to find a way. They wanted to hold the election in this year, in October 2020, because they knew that there would be less scrutiny on them. There would be less chance of the public asking them questions. There would be less chance of something happening as a surprise on the election campaign. We do know that the previous campaigns, they've had a full slate of engagements and travel. Here they're operating in some ways under a bubble out there in public. They're going out in public. They're keeping away from crowds of people, and that also decreases the chance of embarrassment to them. Embarrassment that there might be a protest against them, or embarrassment that there might be a situation like we saw in 2017 when a woman named Linda confronted Christy Clark at a grocery store in North Vancouver and told her that she was not going to vote for Christy Clark. And that reaction caused a lot of people to confirm or to change their vote away from BC Liberal. So the less chance of surprises on the political campaign trail only tends to benefit the governing party. So that's another reason why the NDP wanted to go this year is not only did they see that they were leading the polls, but they saw this opportunity to have a campaign with distance from the public, distance from the media, distance from surprises as well. We don't know exactly what lays on the other side, that if they held the campaign in October 2021, would we know more about how much money they spent? Would we know more about how poorly they were prepared coming into 2020? I think the questions for the NDP in October 2021 will be much more intense about how they managed the government and how they managed our finances and how they managed our health. Except the difference in October 2021 will be, well, they can't be voted out. Except here in British Columbia, there is recall and referendum. That's the one thing that doesn't exist in every province. British Columbia, if you're dissatisfied with your government, you can get enough people's names on petitions and force a recall of your MLAs. So that's something I'm looking at in 2021. Once people start to look at everything that's gone on, there might be some recall campaigns. So keep your eyes out for those.
Also, we're so used to elections being called just an hour or two after the polls close. We know over 800,000 people have asked for mail-in ballots, and those aren't counted until 2 weeks after the polls close. This is not going to be an instant shake-and-bake election result, is it?
No, and that's the other aspect. Going into this, I think the NDP would have known this, that's going to lead to political instability for several weeks. That if we don't know exactly who the government is, then the government can't make big decisions, and because the government can't just get back to work and get sworn in. So we're going to have a period of some instability and some uncertainty after this. Of course, you never know what might happen on election day. If the in-person ballots that are counted amount to and show a very large margin of victory, then it might be academic. But if not, if it is a close result after in-person ballots are counted, then it will lead to that situation where we will be having a major question of who is going to form government, and how will government form? It's bound to narrow. The polarization in the political polls that we see, it's bound to narrow as we get closer to election day. There's bound to be some surprises as well, because it's all about also the way the vote falls. It's votes aren't counted on a province-wide basis. Votes are counted on a riding-by-riding basis. 87 elections is what happens on election day. It's not one election. There's 87 that go around in British Columbia, and you need to win a majority of those 87 ridings, or, as we saw with the NDP, find a way to add up to a majority of the 87 in order to form government. But as we saw in 2017, there were a few ridings that came down to less than 100, and even down in the dozens. Courtney was on Vancouver Island. It was definitely a battleground, which was very close. And we could see something like that again. You never know. That not only will we have the lengthy counting of the absentee ballots, then that also raises the risk that we're going to have contested ridings and recounts, which could drag it out even further into November, possibly into December. Let's hope we have some political stability before Christmas. Enjoy the nice weather we've got in October, and we'll be able to take a step back and look at what the NDP is pushing with this election, and also look at the other parties and look at the other candidates, especially those in ridings where there are independents. Give it a read. Local community newspapers, and also come read me on the breaker.news. Check around for your information before you cast that all-important ballot, because even though it was 3.5 years since the last election, the next one might be a whole 4 years away, and you may not get another chance for 4 years.
Bob, thank you so much.
Thank you.
My guest has been award-winning investigative reporter Bob Mackin, publisher of thebreaker.news, his website, thebreaker.ca. If you have any questions for Bob or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.